Thank you for inviting me to this ICOS Cities Talks. I'm very happy to be here and to be invited to talk to you and present for you something that I am really excited about. The climate budget as a tool to achieve these really ambitious goals that you mentioned. So yes, and what is a climate budget? I will tell you. But we use it as a governance tool to achieve our climate goals. First, I want to ask if you can see my my screen.
Yes, perfectly well.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so here is a short outline of what I will be speaking about today. And as you can see, I will focus on the climate budget. So I will start with an introduction to Oslo and our climate goals. I'll then give an introduction to the climate budget, what it is and how it is set up. I will go through the latest greenhouse gas emission data for Oslo and our latest climate budget analysis for 2022. Then I'll run through how the work with the climate budget is organized in the city. And I will conclude with an example case on clean construction, where we have seen a lot of progress. And we'll summarize with some lessons learned. But first, I want to give you a short introduction to the city of Oslo. So here you can see Oslo marked with a red dot on this map. We are located in the end of the Oslo fjord, and we are Oslo is the capital city of Norway and is also the largest city with a population of around 700,000. And if you also include the areas around Oslo, then the greater Oslo region is about or between 1 and 2 billion. And in Oslo, we have relatively stable summers with mild temperatures. Average high is around 20 degrees. And in the winter time, we have longer period with snow in the forest around Oslo. We have a lot of forest around the city, and therefore cross-country skiing is very popular in the population. But as we all know, the climate is changing and much faster than we would like it to. And we are already seeing it with our own eyes, for example, with rapidly decreasing skiing days here in Oslo. Oslo has reacted to the climate crisis and has one of the most ambitious climate targets of any capital city in the world. The goals are in line with the Paris Agreement, and by 2030, the goal is to reduce the direct emission of greenhouse gases in Oslo by 95%. So it's almost a zero emission city in 2030. Nevertheless, even if we reaches the zero emission goal, the climate will continue to change. And therefore, we also need to adapt to present and future hazards. As we also have a goal to become a climate resilient city by 2030. To achieve these goals, we have developed a new climate strategy towards 2030. This strategy gives further direction to our work and also includes a broader range of goals and climate change related activities, which also include more than just direct emissions. With this strategy, Oslo will, in addition to reduce our own direct emissions, also increase the natural capture of CO2 in the forest, reduce total energy consumption, strengthen the city's climate resilience. We will reduce the city's climate footprint and further develop and implement the climate governance. And it's especially this last point, climate governance, that is the subject for my presentation today. So how do we implement? One of the key challenges for achieving a goal set in the Paris Agreement is the fragmentation of responsibilities between global, regional, and also local levels. Within cities, the same is true. There are often internal divisions within administrations, between different departments, and between different agencies. And this hinders us from achieving our climate goals. Different departments have different goals and responsibilities that is unrelated to climate, and they also have their own budgets they must stick to. This makes it challenging to coordinate climate mitigation measures, which often are crossing sectoral boundaries. There are, of course, many different solutions for addressing this fragmentation, and in Oslo, we think you often achieve the best results by adapting the solution to existing governance structures. Our solution in Oslo was to develop what we call a climate budget. In this budget, we present the emission reductions that are needed to keep a trajectory towards the climate goal in 2030. And just like the financial budget, the climate budget is the responsibility of the Deputy Mayor for Finance, with, of course, solid technical support and climate expertise from the environmental sector in the city. So the key to organize our climate work is this climate budget. The budget is a tool to operationalize our climate goals and the climate strategy on an annual basis. Oslo was, as far as we know, the first city in the world to introduce a climate budget. We used it for the first time in 2017, and we have now just completed our 6th budget for 2022. One thing I can mention is that the climate budget is something a bit different from what many call a climate budget assessment, where the purpose is to evaluate climate impact of allocated funds in a budget. The climate budget is instead more comparable to a carbon budget, which identifies measures to reach a given climate goal. So the climate budget is fully integrated in the financial budget process. We are budgeting towards the future by identifying the measures and instruments needed to reach our targets. The emission impact of each measure is quantified as much as possible, and the responsible entity for implementation is identified, whether it's a department, an agency, or another organization. The budget clearly states what has to be done, by whom, when, and when it's relevant, at what budgetary cost. So this all sounds great, but at the same time, I want to emphasize that this is a work in progress, and we do not have a perfect system yet. We are constantly developing and improving the climate budget, and we gain new experiences every year, and we are also learning from other cities that are implementing similar systems nowadays. Yeah, so Oslo is working to reduce both direct emissions and our entire footprint. With that said, it's important to keep them separate in measurement and accounting. In the climate budget, we only quantify direct emissions, Scope 1. Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions within Oslo's geographical area, such as the burning of fossil fuels in our cars, trucks, and also buses, and from waste incineration. Scope 2 and 3 emissions, such as production and transportation of goods outside the city, is not included in the budget. These emissions are, of course, important, but are often more challenging to quantify, and it's important to use clear system boundaries when allocating emissions. I think you know this. So we are all working to develop methods to better evaluate measures that reduce these emissions, but these are not included in the climate budget. So the first step in developing a climate budget is to define the system boundaries. Like I mentioned, it's possible to include Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in the budget. And you can also develop a climate budget for the city administration or the city as a geographical unit. It depends on the data, knowledge, and resources you have available. Oslo's climate budget covers direct scope 1 emissions from the city of Oslo as a geographical area. So not only emissions from the city administration. We actually found that less than 10% of the total emissions in Oslo are a result of the city administration. So therefore we will focus on the whole geographical area. It includes measures that addresses emissions in all sectors covered by the available statistics on greenhouse gas emissions. And I will come back to this soon. It also contains a combination of national, regional, and local measures, some of which are quantified and others that remain unquantified. Now I will give a brief introduction to greenhouse gas emissions in Oslo and the climate budget analysis from 2022. So before you develop a climate budget, you have to know the historical greenhouse gas emissions. What is the status? Where are we? And the Norwegian Environment Agency publishes an updated greenhouse gas inventory for all the municipalities in Norway each year. This inventory covers 9 emission sectors and 38 sources. It is consistent with the national level methodologies, and this work on the national level to make this inventory is essential for our climate budget. As you can see from this figure, it's from 2019, I think. Yeah, it's the last year we have the statistics. And yeah, as you can see from the figure, almost 90% of Oslo's emissions come from just 3 sources. Almost half of the emissions are from road transport, like cars, trucks, and buses. And around 20% of the emissions are from waste incineration from 2 different sites in the city. And around 20% of emissions are from machinery at construction sites, like excavators, diggers, and other equipment. Unlike many cities, we have very low emissions from heating. And that's because electricity has traditionally been used for heating in Norway. Also, the national government banned the use of heating oil in buildings and since 2020. Yes, so here you have a somewhat complicated figure that shows the climate budget analysis from 2022. The dark green line, almost black on this picture, is historical emission data taken from the greenhouse gas inventory from the national level. And the green dotted line further up in the figure that stretches to 2030 shows the effect of existing and also new measures in this year's climate budget. New to this year's budget is that we also estimated a further reduction potential in order to show how close to the goal we believe we can get with all the other potential climate measures Oslo is developing. This is either measures that are decided but have a highly uncertain effect. This is the dark green area. Or it is new measures that are under consideration, the light green area. The analysis shows that the sum of all measures can potentially reduce emissions by up to 72% by the year 2030. Here it is worth mentioning that making these types of projections and calculations is challenging and always include a high level of uncertainty. The yellow area is our emission gap down to our annual targets. And it's denoted by the yellow dotted line in the figure. We have 2 climate goals in Oslo. Firstly, we have to reduce our emissions by 52% in 2023, so in two years. And we also have a goal to reduce emissions by 95% in 2030. And with that said, I want to also say that we have reduced our emissions by 13% since 2009. So we are on our way, but there's still a gap. Some of the most important climate measures in the analysis include the use of zoning permits to ensure fossil-free construction sites. I'll come back to this later. Investment in carbon capture and storage at Oslo's largest waste incineration site. And this is also the reason for the abrupt dip in emissions from 2025 to 2026 in the figure. It includes a toll system that favors electric vehicles and a zero emission zone in downtown Oslo. The calculations and projections in the figure demonstrates that there is still a considerable gap to reach Oslo's ambitious climate goals, and that we need to continue to work to find and implement new measures. Yes, you don't need to read this table, but it deserves a bit of attention. This is part one of the most important tables from the climate budget. The measures in the table are linked to the quantified climate measures in the figure I showed in the previous slide. The table shows the different measures, individually quantified where possible, compared to a baseline projection. Furthermore, it shows which entities are responsible for implementation and for monitoring and reporting at the measure. Here, I would also like to point out that this is a work in progress, and not all the climate measures in the budget are quantified. The climate budget also has an additional table that shows climate measures that have not been quantified. We are continually working to estimate the effects of more of our climate measures where this is possible. So far, we have looked at the climate budget analysis from 2022, but how is the work organized? How are the measures decided and how is it implemented in Oslo? Here is a figure that shows how the government in Oslo is organized. The city is organized into 8 different departments. All of these departments also have underlying implementing agencies. For example, in the in the yellow square in the middle, you have the Department of Environment and Transport, and it has several underlying agencies, such as the Agency for Urban Environment, the Agency for Waste Management, and the Climate Agency, where I work. In Oslo, the City Finance Department, the other yellow square, in close cooperation with the Environment and Transport Department, manages the climate budget. However, all departments are encouraged to propose measures in the budget and to be responsible entities for implementation and reporting on the measures. The Climate Agency gives expert advice on the climate budget. So here is an illustration of the budget process. The climate budget goes through the same process as the ordinary budget in the city. The budget is developed yearly, like the regular budget, and includes strategic planning for how to reach our climate goals. Early in the year, budgeting instructions are sent to all agencies. In addition to their regular budgeting requests, the agencies are also instructed to suggest climate measures for the coming year's climate budget. These climate measures are developed throughout the spring, and in early May, all agencies send in their new climate measures. The new climate measures ideally include an estimate of climate impact. It also includes budgetary costs and responsible aid entities. And over the summer, the new climate measures are decided and the budget is finalized in September when the budget proposition is sent to the City Council. The Climate Agency assists with climate expertise through the entire budgetary process, both by estimating emission impacts and as a resource for identifying new measures. The process can also be illustrated by an example. The Urban Planning Agency may signal the need for funds to establish more electrical vehicle charging stations early in the year. Throughout the early spring, this idea will be further developed and assessed towards the assembling conference in May. If the government decides to allocate funds to this measure, then the measure will be decided upon and also appear in the final climate budget. And this is the year 2 of the budget process. So after the climate budget in the previous slide is finalized in December, the system for reporting on climate measure begins the next year. This illustration shows this process. The climate budget differs from an ordinary climate action plan since it is a part of the entire budgeting process for the city, and entities must report on climate measures in the same way as they report on progress on expenditures in the financial budget. Early in the year, the departments will send instructions to their underlying agencies and entities to, among other things, follow up climate measures in the climate budget. Here, the departments will also develop and formalize entity-specific targets and indicators for the climate measures. For example, how many electrical vehicle charging stations they hope to install in each quarter. Thereafter, the implementing agencies must report on these targets 3 times throughout the year, in spring, early fall, and the end of the year. If the reporting reveals that the measure is delayed or cannot be implemented, this must be explained and followed up by the responsible entity. So this all sounds like a smooth system, but it is worth mentioning that this process doesn't happen by themselves. And there is, of course, a good amount of administrative work that is necessary to ensure that measures are completed according to plan, and that different departments and entities find new climate measures. In addition to these entity-specific targets and indicators, we also have several indicators that help us monitor Oslo's progress towards achieving different measures. Since the official greenhouse gas emission inventory for Oslo is published with a year's delay, and unfortunately does not to capture all of Oslo's climate measures, we also have developed what we call the climate barometer. And the climate barometer track important trends in the emission how the emissions are developed. And the climate barometer is a collection of indicators that shows how different sectors are developing. 2 examples are we are having monthly new electrical vehicle registrations to monitor the uptake of electrical vehicles, and the number of vehicles passing through the Oslo's toll ring to, among other things, monitor traffic development. These indicators can give us an indication of the effect of our climate measures. Just like the entity-specific goals and indicators, these indicators are updated 3 times a year. And the results are published on the Climate Agency's website, available for all who are interested in the climate work in the city. So I've gone through how the climate budget works in Oslo, and I now would like to finish my presentation by sharing a case where we have seen considerable progress the last few years. And I will also share some lessons learned from the climate budgeting process. Clean construction is an area where we have had a great deal of progress. I think it's a good example of how we have used public procurement as a strategic tool to drive climate solutions forward. Here, our climate agency and a climate budget has played a central role to get this work on the agenda. And now I will give you a presentation how we have worked with the construction sites the past 5 years. We started out with the market dialogue, inviting businesses to work together with city with the city of Oslo to achieve fossil-free construction on city infrastructure projects like schools, kindergartens, nursery homes, roads, and also water pipes. There were skeptics about this, of course, as always. But in the real world, the transition to biofuels was easy. Since 2017, all projects commissioned by the city of Oslo has been fossil-free. But biofuels are a limited resource and have their own sustainability issues. Construction work in a city is semi-stationary, where electricity and power supply is abundant. So next step should be zero emission. Both for city government and from the industry, this was the obvious long-term ambition. But the transition to zero emission is more complicated than the biofuels. We soon realized we would need to engage the global community on both sides of the construction market, both demand and supply. In 2018, working together with our international partners, the Global C40 network of major cities Clean Construction Forum and the European Union Big Buyers Initiative for Zero Emission Construction was launched. In these networks, we work together with other cities to pilot new low carbon solutions and engage with the industry. So that was 2018. In the next step, we investigated how we could adjust the procurement framework to award the companies that provide zero-emission construction services. And from 2019, we have coordinated all projects to use consistent tender criteria. The city tenders construction work for roughly 1 billion euros each year. And when competing for public works, the companies who can provide zero-emission construction get a significant competitive edge. As a result, we have about 100 heavy-duty zero-emission diggers, about 10 tons, on the Norwegian market today. And next year, the industry expects an additional 200 machines in this segment. In 2020, we extended the fossil-free requirement to the state and private sectors by using zoning permits. Going forward, we wish to develop this framework by gradually introducing requirements for zero-emission construction. We have also started to state that from 2025, zero-emission construction will be a standard requirement for all municipal projects. To conclude, I thought I would just share some useful lessons learned when it comes to our experience with a climate budget. It's been important for us to have a system that ensures implementation throughout the budget process and clearly places the responsibility for measures. We experienced that it was useful to start with emission sources that the city controls before moving on to motivate the private sectors to change and implement new measures with unproven technology. Communication, cooperation, and transparency is the key in this process. There will, for example, always be a high level of uncertainty when estimating effects of climate measures. It is important not to be accused of cheating with numbers. Our experience is that as long as we are transparent and communicate uncertainties and are honest about the emission gap, then climate politics can be directed through the climate budget efficiently. It does not give you all the answers, but we believe we found a tool that helps us implement our climate policy and increase the likelihood of achieving our climate goals or ambitious climate goals. With that, I would like to say thank you for your attention, and I hope you have questions. And I will leave you with this summer picture of the city center by the fjord, where we have been working to redevelop industrial areas and open up the coastline to the people of Oslo the past 30 years, actually. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid, for this very enlightening talk and this insight in Oslo's climate budget. That was very, very interesting. We have already a question. One starts maybe from the chat. What is the reference year for the 95% you want to reach in 2013? So where's your starting point there?
Yeah, the starting point is 2009, and that is because this greenhouse gas inventory starts at 2009. We do not have good enough data before 2009, so we will reduce the emissions by 95% in 2030 compared to 2009. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And then we have one. Do you know how much in percent of emission reduction measures are actually within the political possibilities of Oslo?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a good question, and we are continuously working with open up our possibilities to use our politics to reduce emissions, and we are also working with the national level and with the private sector. So we have this network with the private sector with 130 companies and businesses, Business for Climate it's called, where we have this network where we talk about how to reduce the emissions, and we are presenting positive and cool projects where different businesses have reduced their emissions by the transition to zero emission.
Thank you very much. I see Gara Villalba has raised her hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Oh, okay, thanks. I actually just typed it in the chat. I thought maybe you were from there, but I'll just restate it. Yeah, I have a question regarding the monitoring. So the way you've introduced it here and you've explained it, it seems that it's based on the same method as your reporting. So you're adding all the fuel use and all the different sectors, etc. And I'm just wondering, are you envisioning maybe a different monitoring system where you have real measurements, or where you have you thought about this as a municipality of actually having sensors or having equipment to measure the concentrations? Because it seems kind of odd to be monitoring with the same method that you're doing the reporting.
That's a good question. As I mentioned, we have these entity-specific indicators. So the entities have measures they are going to monitor and report on. So then they have result indicators that they are reporting on. And then we also have this climate barometer, where we track different indicators in to monitor how the measurements are developing in the city, like how many vehicles in the toll ring, how many electrical vehicles in the toll ring, etc. So that's another way to monitor. So I think maybe that was the question, and if not, then you can, Did I answer your question with the climate barometer?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm not very clear about if you're thinking of setting up some type of network, especially now as we're talking about the Paul project and all of this. So I was more inclined towards that. It seems like these indicators to me that you've explained again, it seems that they're based on the same kind of data that's used for the monitoring. I'm just really wondering how this reconciles with what's really going on in the urban atmosphere in Oslo.
Yeah, and that is a good question, because we have this inventory that National Environment Agency are developing, that will that is published 1 year delayed, and it's based on models, so it's not sensors, it's not actual data, and it's a problem for us because it doesn't adapt all our measures, so it's hard to actually monitor how the emissions are developing inside of the city. So we are constantly working with this, how to monitor, and yeah, that's why we have established this climate barometer to track different kind of measures and different kind of sectors. But of course, it's not a perfect system, and yeah, it's interesting to look at how could sensors add to this, to help us to monitor the emissions.
Thank you.
Werner, would you like to go and ask a question or reply?
To continue on that, you are, of course, cordially invited to follow the POL project, because we are exactly doing the pilot on these sensors, and perhaps this could also be interesting for Oslo. But my question was going in, or my remark was going into a different direction. First of all, thank you very much for your very inspiring talk, and also for your very inspiring work. I think that's a blueprint for many cities, perhaps. So I think indeed Oslo is perhaps far ahead of many other cities. And what I really liked in your last slide with Oslo coastal area at beautiful summer sunshine was that there was not any car in the picture. And that's referring to my question. Transport is the biggest emitter in Oslo, so I suppose you are focusing on that. And my first question is more a technical question. I suppose the carbon neutral fuel is plant-based. It's not yet hydrogen and renewable energy based. Is this right?
Can you
the fuels, the car fuels, the carbon neutral car fuels, I suppose they are biomass based in their production.
In the cars in the city?
Yes.
No, there's of course fossil fuels. Most of the cars have fossil fuels, but a lot is electrical vehicles. I think Norway is quite in front when it comes to electrical vehicles because of the policies and on the national level, and we also favors electrical vehicles in the toll ring.
So this Caterpillar you were showing, the zero emission Caterpillar was electrical?
Yes, it's electrical. On the construction sites, the machinery is electrical, yeah. But not on all the construction sites, but we do have some construction sites, and we favor in our procurement strategy electrical vehicles on the construction sites. And from 2025, we have stated that all construction sites are going to be electric. Okay. So then it's not allowed to have fossil fuel-based machinery. But that's on the cities' construction sites.
But it may have some effects also on the private ones.
Yes, and I can,
is also about cars. I know this debates from many other cities, and the cars are having a lot of, let's say, space also the not running cars, the parking cars use a lot of space in cities. So, but the attitudes of the people is, I want to stop my vehicle just in front of the shop where I'm going to buy something. So how is the attitude? How are people taking up restrictions towards private vehicles? Is this some kind of a strong fighting? Is this the? I can suppose that there are interests also of vehicle drivers to keep this almost human right to park in front of the shop where I'm buying things.
Yeah, you're totally right. We do have a lot of skeptical people to our policies on cars. We have a car-free zone in the city center. You mentioned this at the picture. You didn't see any cars, and that's right. We do have a car-free zone, but you can have deliveries, and it's just hard to drive cars, but you can drive, but it's not, you shouldn't, because it's too hard.
But how are people taking it?
There are some are mad, and in the social media there are a lot of angry men, but we see also, we have this this survey each year on for the inhabitants in Oslo, how do they cope with the climate goals, and how do they, and also questions about the car-free city and the toll ring, and questions around how you can, it's harder to drive cars. And we see that more and more people are happy about it. So it's more than 50% likes the toll ring and see how and likes the effects of the toll ring. So therefore the policies are going forward on this area. It's a greener city, it's easier to cycle, it's easier to walk, and I think people sees that. So yeah.
Thank you. Maybe we can take one question from the chat, from Jean-Mathieu. Well, actually two questions. One is the time frame between 2010 and 2020. Could you follow up on those targets you defined? I think, you know, how good did you do there?
Yeah.
And in that regard, to the same question, is that the 95% emission reduction you have, or this target you have, and those electrical vehicles on construction sites, they are electric, but do you then just shift the source basically outside to this scope 2 or 3 you had in the very beginning, because now you charge those vehicles in the city and the production is somewhere outside the city, possibly not green?
That's a good question. First, to the first question, yeah, we have reduced emissions by 13% in 2019 compared to 2009, and 2019 is the last year of the inventory. So it's we will have new data for 2020 in December. So it's always a thrill to write on. So then we will see if there's further reduction in 2020.
Actually, my question was more, probably during the period between 2009 and 2019, you already had targets of reductions, yearly targets. And did you manage to reach those targets, or?
Oh, if we had yearly targets? No, actually, the budget was established for the first time in 2017. It was the first year of the climate budget. So first year we started to count like this, and also had a tool to to aggregate all the measures and compare it to the goals. Was that the answer for your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, and to the other question, if we are just moving our emissions outside of the city, is a good question, but and we see it like all cities have to do the same. And then if we all can do the same to just forbid fossil fuel, then we will manage together. So we are a pilot city on how to reduce the direct emissions, and we are constantly working on reducing the entire footprint as well. So we have in our procurement strategy, there are a lot of we are working with this as well. So yes, we are not working only on direct emissions. This goal, 95%, is for the direct emissions, and that is the goal we are accounting the measures and aggregating the reduction for, but we are, of course, working with the entire footprint as well. Yeah. Was that the answer for the question?
Yeah, thank you.
And I can say that we have translated the last climate budget 2022 to English. So if it's interesting, I could leave it in the chat, maybe, or for someone.
Yeah, I think that would be very much appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we have well, not much time left, but there is another question from Virgil. What type of actions are planned within the financial sector? Or well, do you have any plans in that regard?
One more time.
The question was, what type of actions are planned within the financial sector? And if I don't put the question properly, if Virgil is still here, then feel free to.
Yes. So hello, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really, really interesting. So what I would like to know is, what kind of action is planned within the financial sectors, for instance, in banks, like the investment of banks or private sectors, because I heard you were talking about partnerships with businesses, but and you talk also about the reduction of energy consumption, but it would potentially mean also a reduction of the GDP for Oslo. And so I was just wondering if this was taking into account, because maybe the classical economical view might be changing with all these new actions.
We are talking about like climate risks with the financial sector, using this business for climate network, as you mentioned. So we are using this network to talk about financial risks regarding to climate change. But on this level, so just like financial risks and
Okay, so because like I think also a lot of people, like when we have money just slipping in the bank, it doesn't do nothing. It's also used by banks and like major reports from a little bit all over the world, and NGOs report that like there is still growing into investment of fossil fuels projects, even though like there is a lot of greenwashing around the banks, and they would say, oh, now we have new pens that are ecological, so that the bank is green. And
okay, I think I understand. So do you mean if the city of Oslo is investing in different kind of funds, or
Or trying also to quantify, for example, every financial actions that is made to maybe, for example, when somebody buys something, if it's taking into account into the global emission also with the banks.
I think it's hard to answer. I don't know if I really get the question. We are working with to develop a climate budget assessment where we go through all the funds in the budget, and then we do a climate assessment of all our investment and also how we use the money.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe we can ask Andreas. You had your hand raised, and I think you posted your question in the chat. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you.
Have the floor.
The question was on this direct and indirect emissions, and I appreciate very much that you do the direct emissions, because this is a start and very concrete. So not to be celebrated by promises, but doing actions. That's very nice. But on the other hand, I would also think, what is the bulk footprint of Oslo, and how much of the direct emissions contribute to it?
We have tried to estimate the scope 3 emissions in Oslo, and we see that it's around between 6 and 12 times the direct emissions.
Yes.
So yeah, the uncertainty is so big that we don't use it like an inventory, but we use it like a status. So we know that there's a lot to do when it comes to scope 3 emissions, and it's a hard nut, but we are continuously working with it, and we are working with developing indicators to track and monitor our work with the entire footprint.
Okay, and this is so accepted that you concentrate on the direct from the efficiency aspect from your community?
Yeah, because we are also working. I think they see most of the work we are doing with the entire footprint, with all the the webinars and all the arrangements we are having. Then it's more focusing on the footprint. So when we are speaking to the population, then it's the footprint we are.
Okay. Thank you so much. Nice.
We are at the end of the time. Maybe we can have one last question, and then we have to stop. But Hervé posted this very early on in the chat. Is an annual climate budget easy to manage? Or yeah, Hervé, please go ahead.
No, you can ask it, no problem. But yes, you showed, I think, slide 14, a report that was 2 or 3 years old, and it's time consuming to build greenhouse gas emission reports, but you have a yearly emission budget process, and I was asking how you can deal with a yearly process and quite old data for the reports.
Yeah, the data is published, like the inventory is published 1 year delayed, but we use this as the inventory for the budget, and yeah, it could be a problem, but it's okay. Like for the 2022 budget, we use 2019 as the status, and then we make a projection of how the emissions are developing between 2019 and 2022. So of course we would like the inventory to be published faster, but we manage it to be like this, and it's the best inventory we have. So yeah,